It's belonging to this pre-pottery Neolithic period, to this PPNA period mainly. Trevor gave us a chronological framework, so there's no need to repeat it now in detail. And for this period, the size of Göbekli Tepe is very unusual. It's a mound with a maximum height of 15 meters of archaeological levels and a size of 300 by 300 meters. Visible here, the site on this image, of course. But it's not only its size, its position in the landscape, being on top of a limestone plateau. We will see it in further pictures, maybe more better, but you can recognize here's a natural limestone plateau and the artificial mound on top of it. As a site of Göbekli is a landmark. This is one speciality, but most important is its cultural setting. In this map indicated in red are also regions in the world where the transition from hunter-gatherers to farmers took place independently from each other. And we recognize that 9,000 means 9,000 BC, of course, is the oldest date we can give here. So in the Near East, this transition happens first time in a world scale. And as we already have seen in some maps of Trevor, from this region, from this core region, the spread of this new way of life, the spread of the agricultural way of life was going quickly across Europe and not indicated in this map across the Middle East and North Africa. And this core region also has a name, Fertile Crescent. It's a name coined by an Egyptologist in the beginning of the last century because of its shape. So in the southern part there are the Arabian Desert, and in the north there are the range of the Taurus Mountains, the Zagros Mountains. So roughly it's a shape of a crescent, the most fertile regions of the Near East. And in this map indicated are only the most important sites of this Fertile Crescent and Göbekli Tepe being located in the center of this region. And that this important transition from hunter-gatherers to farmers happened in this region, took place in this region, was not a surprise for us because natural sciences predicted it many, many years ago. Here in this map are indicated in several red lines the distributions of wild species, of wild plants, wild species, which later had been domesticated. And it's clear if you are domesticating a species, you have to have access to its wild form. And the green circle is an area where all these distribution maps have a common occurrence. And the site of Göbekli Tepe is in the center of this green circle, which is the upper Euphrates and the upper Tigris region. Now, so it was the reason that this part we already heard from Trevor's talk, the hilly flanks of the Fertile Crescent, that in this part this important transition happened, was clear for several scientists, and mainly Robert Braidwood and Harlett Champel here in this picture had starting research in this area in the 60s of the last century. They located many sites, many early sites belonging to this period. Göbekli Tepe also had been mentioned in their list, but in this time was not ripe to recognize the importance of these sites. They didn't recognize that all this earthen hill had been an artificial hill, and so they decided to continue with their work, with excavation work in a site called Chione. Trevor already told us about this site. Fortunately, we have this map, an air photo done in '95 before we started with archaeological work. Maybe you can understand now a little bit better this landmark position on top of this limestone, of this natural limestone plateau. In these times there was only one tree, it's a wish tree, which is on top of the site, and no remains, no architectural remains had been visible. This changed during our work now, which we did since '95, as I told you. Here a map from last autumn, from 2011. Now there are a little bit more trees planted by the farmers, but you see here the excavation areas. To have an idea about scale, such a rectangular is 10 by 10 meters, so you have an idea about the size of the excavations. In my talk, we will concentrate mainly about the main excavation area, which you can see here, which is on the southeastern slope of the site. Here a photo which is a little bit nearer. In this main excavation area, we have 4 monumental enclosures numbered in order of their discovery: A, B, C, and D. This enclosure G is not so important. We will not talk about this. What we already can recognize here is that the general layout always is repeated. There are huge monolithic pillars set in circles or ovals, and there are always 2 in the center of these enclosures. Here another photo done at night gives you an impression about enclosure D, which is very, very well preserved with its central pillars under excavation here in this part, the oval around. And you have an idea about this landmark position. We have here a view of the part of the Haran Plain. It's not Urfa, it's a Haran Plain with its villages, which is south of Göbekli Tepe. Why we had been so sure about Göbekli Tepe, about its content. Nothing had been visible at the surface, as we saw before. We had this knowledge, or we got this knowledge by excavating a site called Megalithic in the 80s of the last century, excavations done by Harald Hauptmann from the University of Heidelberg, and I was lucky enough to be team member during all seasons. In Megalithic, first time we discovered such a building, such an arrangement of pillars. It was only one building. It was not round or oval, but rectangular. But the central pillars, one is destroyed here, but it's enough left that we can be sure about it. There had been 2 central pillars and other pillars around it. Unfortunately, it was quite heavily destroyed in later periods, but the remains are enough to understand that its layout was very similar, or what we later learned from Göbekli is very similar to the Göbekli Tepe structures. Here a few of all the excavation area. Here's this special building we saw in the image before. And here we have houses, like in China. You saw examples from China in Traversdorf, very similar houses in Megalithic. This round structure is belonging to a later phase, to a Chalcolithic period, which is also existent here. But these are the Neolithic houses and the special building north of it. And here a reconstruction of this special building with its monolithic pillars, which had already this T-shaped form, which is so typical for Göbekli Tepe. So the symbolism is very similar. And already in Megalithic we understood that this T-shaped form is a stilized human shape. The T being the human head seen in profile, pillar shaft being the human's body, and arms and fingers depicted in flat relief. This makes us so sure about this understanding of the shape of these pillars. But not only that the T-shaped pillars had been discovered first time in Megalithic, also first time we discovered huge limestone sculptures made of limestone of enormous size. So this head, for example, is over life size in its dimension. And several other, I will show you some other examples, because unfortunately Megalithic finds are for the moment not in display in Urfa Museum, but in the new museum we will see them. But just to have an idea about the richness of the art of this site of Megalithic. Or here some, not only humans had been depicted, but also animals. Here a big vulture in the lower part and the head of a lion. Or here's another example of a stone vessel decorated in flat relief, showing two human-like figures and a turtle-like animal here. Or another example of a limestone slab with an incision of maybe persons. Or here's another example of sculptures from Megalithic, a human head, life-size human head, which is held by a big bird which is behind the head. We understand here that this part is a bird which is a wing, the tail, and the legs. The rest is destroyed. Or another example, again, a big bird is holding here 2 human heads. So it was clear from these findings from this Megalithic that in the Urfa region, that in the Upper Euphrates, Upper Tigris region, there is a new quality of Neolithic sites. And I give here now an example from Göbekli Tepe, a piece which is in display in the Urfa Museum, where this kind of art, where this very exciting depictions had been now found in many, many other examples. Especially the motif, I go back for one time, the motif of a bird or an animal holding a human head. This motif is repeated in Göbekli Tepe now several times. Here, unfortunately, the face is lost, but a big animal is holding a human head or a human person. So, but now going back to the more architectural plan and details, here a schematical map showing us the large circles, the monumental circles A, B, C, D indicated in green, in red, of course, the T-shaped pillars, and in yellow and other colors, a younger layer which is on top of the older layer. The monumental layer, the green layer, is belonging to the 10th millennium or to the time 9,600 to 8,800, while the other layer is belonging to the period 8,800 to 8,200. You remember again from Trevor's talk, the time 9,600 is not just a date, it's not just a dating, it's the end of the Ice Age and the beginning of the Holocene. So it looks like that the Göbekli Tepe really is part of this global story of the new age, the Holocene age, and it's starting exactly in this time. We saw in the map before the main excavation area, here again repeated A, B, C, D, the 4 enclosures which are under excavation so far. But here a map showing all the mound and the results of geophysical mapping or geophysical analysis, ground penetrating radar and geoelectrics and other methods. And we show the most clear results of this work, and we understand that these enclosures, these oval or roundish enclosures, are not only existing in the excavation area, but they are existent all over the mound. So this map makes clear that we had not only been lucky to find maybe the most important structures in our excavation area. No, these structures are repeated several times, and it is clear that the mound of Göbekli Tepe really was not a normal settlement. It's very, very different from the other sites we know. So it's a site which its main function are these enclosures of a ritual purpose. And here a reconstruction of enclosure C and D from our excavation area, published in National Geographic last year, showing how a reconstruction could look like and how the construction had been done, showing the transport of the pillars which had been produced in the quarries on the limestone plateau, the transport of the shaping of the pillars, the shaping of the reliefs which are there, and the erection of the enclosure. And this T form we learned from, we first time discovered in Megalithic, which we can understand being stilized human-like. This T form is really some unique phenomenon of this culture of Göbekli Tepe and the surrounding settlements, and it's not repeated somewhere else on our Earth and in any other culture. The most similar form we can find when we are doing a survey all over the landscapes are the taulas from Menorca, but these are only roughly similar because the name taula, it means table, and they are really tables made of 2 stones, an upper part set on a shaft, so it's just a rough similarity. The Göbekli Tepe pillars are always made from 1 stone and have a very, very different meaning. And the taulas never have reliefs, and such reliefs, mainly animals, are another characteristic of the T-shapes from Göbekli Tepe. And this we didn't find in Megalithic. In Megalithic we had very often depicted the arms and the fingers, as we saw in the image before. And Göbekli Tepe very often we have only animals depicted on these pillars. Now here another view to enclosure D, the best preserved ones for the moment, where we are still working, and we see here the central pillars, and what we can recognize here, in this case we also have the arms depicted. And here a view to enclosure C, which is not so well preserved. Unfortunately, there had been a heavy destruction in antiquity, maybe in the Iron Age, so a destruction just to destroy the central pillars of this enclosure. Usually we don't change anything, we are just excavating it and keep it as it is, but in few examples we make exceptions. For example, one of the central pillars was found in this position, so we couldn't continue to excavate without doing something, so we decided in this case to re-erect this part, but usually we don't change the situation. This exception also includes these parts, these big fragments belonging to the eastern central pillar, only to this one. The upper part of this one is still missing. So these parts, of course, had been moved during the excavation to be able to excavate this enclosure completely. And we did a laser scanning of these fragments and had been able so far to do a virtual reconstruction of these fragments. They all belong to the eastern central pillar, as I told you. We could do this virtual reconstruction coming to a height of 5 meters above the pedestals where the pillars had been set in. Yeah, and on the western pillar, the upper part is still missing, as I told you. Again, a relief of an animal, again, a relief of a fox. And to mention about the floor and the pedestals, we see here, it's a natural bedrock, very well smoothed, very well worked, and the pedestals are cut out of the bedrock. And in the back you see something we will see later, an image more nearer, a very, very fantastic find, and high relief on a pillar made from one stone and a flat relief below it. Here are some examples of the foxes depicted. The foxes are a very common motif. The animals depicted mostly are snakes. We will see other examples, but followed by foxes, which are a very common motif of the animal reliefs. The animals very often are depicted alone, as only one animal on one face of a pillar, but sometimes we have also combinations. Here, for example, a bull, a fox, and a crane. Or here in this image I show you the boars, which are again very often depicted, wild boars, of course. We know from the animal bones, from the archaeofauna, we don't have domesticated animals yet in Göbekli Tepe. We have only wild fauna, and of course these are wild boars depicted here. And what we can understand, for example, from these depictions here, it's not the same boar, it's on different pillars here with some birds, and that one with a fox. These reliefs only could be made by trained workmen. It's not work of everyone. It should be trained workmen who know a boar has to look like that image, and they could repeat it in many times. And some pillars have very, very fantastic combinations of motifs, not just an animal or 2 or 3 animals, but a combination of motifs. Here, for example, one pillar 43 from enclosure D, which is showing us really a scene or an illustration of something which is shown here. And here we have not only a big vulture, a big bird, a vulture clear, or other birds, we have also abstract motifs which are clearly not depicting animals. So we don't know what the meaning of these symbols is. Maybe this here is showing architecture or showing us architecture, but it's not clear, this interpretation, and there are animals set to each of these motifs. Very interesting is also the lower part. We have a very big scorpion. We have some animals only partially visible. This is the original wall, which is covering some of the reliefs. This happens very often, this case. And very important, here we have a headless person, which is in the right lower part of the pillar. And the vulture and the headless person brings us again to Çatalhöyük. We saw examples from this very important site in the Konya plain in central Anatolia, 2,000 years younger than Göbekli Tepe, but still repeating motifs which first time are visible in Göbekli Tepe. So we saw this map of the spread of this new invention of the invention of agriculture, and Çatalhöyük is part of this first wave reaching Central Anatolia and clearly belonging to the world of Göbekli Tepe. Here another example of such a rich decorated pillar, again from enclosure D, with several birds visible here, cranes visible here, again abstract motifs with uncertain meaning repeated several times, a lot of snakes depicted here, and an insect, snakes, and the lower part a spider. So, and it's getting very clear, this is not only decoration, this is not an ornament. Here, stories or myths are illustrated by this depiction. Or here are some other examples, recently excavated, one of a central pillar of a new circle, of a new enclosure on the northwestern part of the mound with a very big animal, maybe a leopard, and another pillar of this circle with a dense combination of motifs. More than 50 animals are visible here. We recognize several birds here, large ones and smaller ones. We recognize a lot of snakes and also some quadrupeds. And all these animals are moving from the right to the left, except one big bird in the center, which is moving from left to right. We can identify it as an eagle or maybe a vulture, a big bird anyway. When this bird is catching a snake, and the shape of the body of this snake maybe is indicating that this snake is being killed by the bird. So again, it's very clear, it's an illustration of something is happening here, there is action shown in this relief. These reliefs are illustrations of stories, of myths of the Stone Age. Yeah, again, a view to enclosure D with its very well preservation, with its very well preserved central pillars, which we have completely preserved. And it's just showing us how we excavated it, because we had to check if they are really complete, if they are unbroken, to be able to continue the work without danger for us and for the workmen. We had to do this because the central pillars had been not in a vertical position anymore, but in a slightly oblique position, so we had to bring them back in the vertical position during our work. And yeah, here you see it's still in the oblique position. Now they are in the vertical position. And during excavation, during removing this backfill, which is explaining the very well preservation, we discovered that some objects had been deliberately placed nearby the pillars in the backfill. It was a fragment of a flat relief from an object which is unknown in its original shape, but this fragment shows us a new animal in our zoological garden, let's say. So it's a hyena, clearly a hyena, again together with a vulture. I have to go back because I forgot to explain you one important fact. It's why these enclosures are preserved in such a good way, because they had been backfilled completely in the Stone Age. So during the pre-Proto-Neolithic period, the enclosures had been erected, they had been used for some rituals, and later they had been completely filled in, and this explains the very well preservation. Okay, near the eastern central pillar we found this relief with the hyena. Nearby the western central pillar, again we found something clearly deliberately placed directly near the pillar, two human heads made from limestone, made in life-size sculptures of human heads. Other examples of such heads we found already earlier in other contexts, but it is clear that these life-size heads had been belonging to statues similar to the now famous Urfa statue, which is not from Göbekli Tepe, but from a contemporaneous site which existed once in Urfa, which is now lost due to the building activities of the old town. But fortunately, one example survived as a statue which is now visible in the Museum of Urfa. And here are some other examples of human sculptures found in Göbekli Tepe, and more. I cannot show you any example now. not only human sculptures had been discovered in Göbekli Tepe, of course also animals are existing, and here one sculpture of a boar, a wild boar, which had been found in situ, being anchored in one of the stone benches of enclosure C. And here are some more of these sculptures, which are mainly two types. We can now understand there are two types being depicted, the boars, the wild boars, and animals showing its teeth in a very aggressive habit. So it's clear these are in both types are in a very aggressive habit depicted. And so we can understand that the sculptures are mainly depicting guardians of enclosures, whilst the flat relief are more narrative in their character. So the flat reliefs and the sculptures don't show the same spectrum. They have a different meaning in a different content. Guardians, for example, of the T-shapes. Here we have this example we already saw before, a high relief sitting on the stomach of this T-shape being made from one stone, a masterpiece of handicraft. Yeah, and again, the so-called totem pole we saw already, which is a third category. We have the flat reliefs, we have the sculptures showing guardians, and we have combination of motifs in the sculptures, which are concentrating on this element of a big animal holding a human head. Here, a collection of these motifs we saw from Megalithic already, this example, and that one we have from Göbekli Tepe, the same motif, big animal holding human head. This is a find of the recent campaign. For some weeks we discovered it, a big bird, again very well visible, the wings and the breeze, again holding a head. And we're coming to another group of objects, of megalithic objects. We are unveiling at the side. We learned about the T-shapes, but there is a group of megalithic objects which can be reconstructed as being porthole stones, like this example from a grave from Western Europe, where we have quite similar porthole stones giving the access to the grave chamber in this case, and we can make the reconstructions that these porthole stones also had been used in the walls of the enclosures, giving access to the enclosure. And last season we found now an example really in this position, strengthens this reconstruction that they had been used in a vertical position in walls, giving access to something behind. And in this case, the first time we discovered that they could be also with flat reliefs showing, in this case, two foxes and a bull's head on top. And another example from a so far unexcavated structure. So you see here's a trench, and the walls are not reached, but just this very big porthole stone is visible for the moment. First time with two entrances and with high reliefs of animals, which are clearly like guardians of these entrances, showing a snake, a bull, a he-goat, and a leopard-like animal. And here are some further examples of such high reliefs, which are sitting not only on pillars, as we have learned from this example, but also are sitting on such porthole stones, as in this case. Here another example of a high relief on a pillar. And we are coming to a very, very important observation. So in Göbekli Tepe we have this art in a monumental way, in large scale, both high reliefs, flat reliefs, and other things. We don't have this in other sites. Megalithic is an exception. We have art of this in Megalithic, but it's very near to Göbekli Tepe. But in other sites of the region, we can observe that motifs from Göbekli Tepe are repeated, like here in Charfelahwa. We heard already about this site in North Syria, where we have stone plaquettes, small stone plaquettes of hand size with incised motifs, but there are clear some correspondences of the motifs. And so we come to a picture which clearly shows that Göbekli Tepe is not a normal settlement. It's clear their structures are megalithic, they are monumental. It's a site for, with a clear different function from these sites around in the land like Trafil, like Tel Arbor, Tel Karamel, other sites. These are the settlements of people who have Göbekli Tepe as a central place where they are doing different things as they are doing in their settlements. Another example of such a correspondence, the big birds, vultures or eagles, which are depicted on these stone plaques, and which are depicted in a different way, here more naturalistic, or here in a very stilized way. But and even Çatalhöyük we can include again in this world, and we can understand that there are pictures in a monumental way in Göbekli Tepe which had been repeated on these miniature artifacts. And we come to such a map which is showing Göbekli Tepe here in the center, in red indicated sites where we know the symbolic form of the T-shapes also, but only Megalithic is explored by excavations. There are some unexcavated sites around, but it's a region very close to Urfa, but in more distance we have sites which artifacts with motifs which are repeating motifs from Göbekli Tepe. So we come to a map showing Göbekli in the center of something we can call the cultic community of Göbekli Tepe, because these sites are clear in correspondence with the site of Göbekli Tepe. And you remember the map I showed you at the beginning of my talk, the green circle done by the natural sciences, indicating the distribution of wild species of plants which had been later being domesticated, and it's nearly the same area, the same circle. And so we can understand that these people, these hunter-gatherers in Upper Mesopotamia, so we can call this landscape, southeastern Turkey, northern Syria, and also including parts of northern Iraq, that these people are not only inventors of agriculture, not only inventing the new way of life, are not only domesticating plants and animals, they also are inventing architecture and also monumental architecture. And so they are packing something we call Neolithic package, which includes all these inventions, these innovations, which makes their life now so different and which is so successful that it very quickly is spread all over the old world, over Europe, Northeastern Africa, and the Middle East. Yeah, so we came to the end of my talk. It's time to say thanks to our team, which includes students and specialists, which includes the workmen from the nearby village of Öğrencik, and of course to say thanks to the General Directorate of Antiquities in Ankara, who gives us a chance to excavate these very, very important sites. And an Ahmed Yasman and to the audience to give us a chance to present you the results of our work.
Thank you very much for Ms. Çiğdem Schmidt for translation. Tekrardan. He's asking about the museum. Is it going to be a museum? Because we're lacking of the museum when we go to the site. We need to see pieces in the museum, so we cannot find it so much here.
Yes, the museum is an old museum. It's done in the 80s. It was done for the excavations, for the findings of excavations of the Atatürk barrage, rescue excavations. Now a new museum will be built, and all the pieces which are in the depots now will be in exhibition, of course.
What are your thoughts about the animal depictions? Are they depicting of the animals in that period which they're living there, or are is there any domestication figures, or what's your thought about those animal depictions?
As the animals depicted all had been existing in this region, so we know it very well by the archaeofauna, which is very rich and which shows us wild cattle, wild ass, gazelles and red deer and wild boar. So everything which had been depicted was existing in this region, and it would exist if not humans would make it extinct. But we have also snakes and we have insects, spiders, scorpions. It makes clear it's not the fauna depicted which they had been hunted. Something else is depicted. The animals with a specific meaning of myths, of stories of the Stone Age. This had been.
Is it related with some emotion of fear?
Yes, sure. For example, it's not a very peaceful surrounding, having all these snakes and spiders and scorpions. So it makes it similar a little bit to the Upper Paleolithic art known from the caves of, especially from France, which also are showing us animals which are not the animals being hunted, but which are part of mythological events which are illustrated with this picture. But there is one important difference to the Upper Paleolithic art. In the caves, we nearly don't see any human depiction, or when there are humans depicted, they are very small and unimportant. In Göbekli Tepe now, the picture changed completely, because we have the T-shapes showing us stilized humans, and the animals are now attributes of this human life.
Professor Schmidt, have you any estimate of how long it would have taken for the whole site to be constructed from start to finish? And secondly, is there any evidence of where the people who built Göbekli Tepe, or the people who were regularly visiting it, of where they lived? Has any excavations been done in that respect?
The lifespan of the monumental phase is around 800 years. So we can be sure, or we are sure, they didn't construct all the things in one time, but step by step. Some enclosures had been constructed, some had been backfilled, new ones had been constructed, and this in a time span of 800 years. Regarding the monumental phase, it was a green phase in our map, and another 600 years for the later phase, when everything was getting smaller and reduced till zero, when the site had been abandoned around 8,000. It was a map I showed you before, so with the known settlements in the Upper Euphrates, Upper Tigris region. So maybe the people who constructed Göbekli Tepe came from settlements like Nevalichuri, like China, which are quite close to the site, but maybe also from larger areas. But the site itself, it's not a normal settlement. There is not a population there. There is no access to water, for example, and what we are excavating doesn't show any similarities with house types we know from the settlements, like Chione, like Nevalichuri. We know how the houses are looking like. It's not existent at Göbekli Tepe, so it's clear it's a site for ritual purposes mainly. Maybe some people lived there all over a year for maintenance, these ritual structures. But the population which was doing the work in the quarries, which are doing the transport, these some 100 people we estimate, these are living in the settlements around Göbekli Tepe.
I'm from Harran University, Atenkta, and you mentioned about condors, but when I visit the site, I see some other different types of birds which are not existed in the world now. He mentions the name, but I didn't.
Dronte, I think you mean. I wouldn't exclude that they are depicting some strange birds, but it would be the only example, because all the other animals are existing in our archaeofauna. So I think you mean this very big head of a bird, and be nearby the headless person. This would be a surprise, because Dronte, I think it's from Australia, or where did it live? The drone in some islands. Okay, I cannot exclude it, but in our bird bones, we have a lot of bird bones. There are only the birds which we expect to live there.
Trevor Watkins, as he explained, there were clans in those days before then, and then we see many other, much in the numbers. Is this a kind of changing of religion in terms of getting in this chronology.
And each animal symbol also symbolizes the clan, and the clan number is very few when compared to thousands of people. But here, thousands of people coming together, and also all the clans coming together, maybe to start a new kind of religion.
Of course, it's possible, such an explanation, but it's not the only explanation for such things.
You mentioned about the portals.
Yeah.
How big are those portals? Just one?
Different size. There are miniatures which are more symbolic, but there are other ones where a normal person can pass.
If the people are passing one by one, can we conclude that they were not gathering a lot of people?
Yes,
so can
yes,
we think about there several peoples and doing some initiations?
Yeah, it looks like that these enclosures had been not made for a huge amount of people, but only for few had been access to this enclosure.
Then can we say that for another religion, type of religion, doing another type of rituals, that can we say that? Because of the shamanic clans were shamans and
these are different models, so we have to test it, so we cannot be sure about if this model is true with the clans and the shamanic explanation. But we can only be sure that the function of these structures was clearly not a domestic function, but what they really did there, why they really erected it, why they backfilled it, and in which row all these events had been taking place. So we're still working on this question. We don't have final answers. Our hypothesis is that the structures are in context with burial reeds, with burials, and the final appearance was not that of a building, but that of a tumulus, of a grave mound.
Is this the Göbekli Tepe's final message? The civilization didn't started with producing, but the religion.
So the religion was important, very important in this time. We can see that these rituals clearly have, there is a religion in background which gives the motivation to do all these things, and it's clear that the transition from hunter to farmer, it is more a byproduct of this religious behavior. This had been the ideas of Jacques Cauvin. Trevor had mentioned in him a French archaeologist who wrote these ideas already in the 80s, 90s of the last century.
It contradicts with Golden Child.
Yeah.
You're talking about the religious architecture, but what about the public architecture at the same period?
It looks similar. So it's very common that public architecture and religious architecture are very near, or the religious architecture is copying public architecture. For example, the mosque is made for gatherings, so they used a space, just an open space for gatherings. So it's not a specific architecture. It's a specific architecture, but it's very similar to communal architecture. Or for example, the first churches, or the type of the basilica, one of the old church types, it was a market place. The basilica was used in Roman time, in pre-Christian times, for gathering many people.
My question concerns the small holes as you enter the site on your right. I think it's enclosure E. There's dozens of small, very deliberate holes on the bedrock. Mm-hmm. First of all, are those important, and what might they mean? And also on top of the T forms, there are small indentations that look somewhat deliberate.
Yeah, these cup holes, they are existing in several types and several situations. So maybe they don't have all the similar functions. So on top of the pillars we have such cup holes. Maybe they had been done after the backfill, when the upper part of the pillar had been visible, done to make offerings there. But the cup holes in the bedrock maybe have a different function. In enclosure E, where we have such a field with cup holes, maybe it's just a technique to work in the bedrock, to make such pits in the bedrock. So it looks like that there are several functions of these cup holes.
Hi, I will have two questions. One is, if I'm not mistaken, the circular structures are waterproof at the floor, like at the base. Is this so, and how could you interpret this? The second is the artifacts on the megaliths or in the sites has been deteriorated by each layer. meaning the later ones who built on top of it didn't make as good art structures and things. So is this the fading away of the collective memory, or how do you interpret it?
Maybe I misunderstood your question. The artifacts are showing us a collective memory, but what was about the stratigraphy?
Okay, if I'm not mistaken again, there are layers of different civilizations, like 500 years later there's another one or whatever. So on each layer, the one on the very bottom is the most beautifully done. But as the time goes by, the people who built the other ones didn't make as good job in terms of art within the megaliths. So is this the, how do you interpret this? Could this be the fading away of this collective memory that we talked about?
The phases of the structure. So each phase, this type of changing. So is there any decline of the description?
So we have two main phases, the monumental one and the younger one, and it's clearly a decline visible. So, but we are not sure if the green layer, the oldest layer so far, is really the earliest ones. So the mound is quite large, and we are not sure if maybe there are older layers existent which we didn't excavate so far. So, but what we see is this monumental phase with its rich art and a decline in the 9th millennium in the later phase till zero. So we have few pillars or small pillars. We have few reliefs depicted on them, and also the limestone sculptures are getting fewer and fewer. So it's a clear decline.
The waterproof. The first question was.
How was the first question?
Are there floors that waterproof?
Yes.
And how do you interpret?
So we have these bedrock floors which are clear waterproofed and which always also have a little. They are inclined, so the water is running out of the enclosures. And what we have later is not the bedrock, but what we call terrazzo. In China, it was discovered first time. This kind of concrete, of artificial concrete. In Megalithic, this building had a terrazzo floor. In Göbekli Tepe, we have many terrazzo floors in the in the younger layers. But it looks like that these terrazzo floors are copying bedrock, and they are waterproof again. So the waterproof is a very important fact or a very important item for these floors.
Thank you for the wonderful presentation. You showed us a lot of sculptures and high reliefs. So we know that they are very well good craftspeople. We should know that. And they have a high sense of expressing the physical world, very precise. I mean, the animal figures, even the human figures from Urfa, the Balıklı Göl sculpture. So, but when we look at the T-shapes and their placements, it's totally different. So how did you come to an understanding that it's a stylized human figure? Because it looks like a very abstract symbol.
It's a very important observation, this difference between the naturalistic depictions and this high stilized T-shape. And I think it's only one answer on this question, why it's so different. So the T-shapes are not belonging to our world. They are supranatural, whilst the animals and the humans depicted in more or less naturalistic way, they are from our world. They are the guardians, they are the servants maybe, or something around this T-shape, but the T-shapes, they are coming from another world, and so it was not possible or not allowed to depict them more naturally. Also, had been looking like that. We never have a face depicted there, so they are clearly supernatural beings.
There is no depiction of
there is one. No, there is one. I didn't show, but we have one gazelle, clearly a gazelle depicted.
Bir tane var. Tam net olarak görebiliyoruz gazeli olduğunu.
It's about the spiral, the structure with the spiral form. I think is it the oldest? I don't know, but it's.
We are not sure if it's a spiral or concentric circles. It looks more like concentric circles.
My question is, there is an inner part, and whether there's an entrance. Have you found an entrance to it?
We have in enclosure A and C, we have entrances clearly visible in the architecture, but not in B and D for the moment. In Anlatıyor we have an entrance, in China we have, no, they are not preserved, this part of the buildings. So it's not clear if maybe in B and D, if the entrance was from the roof, if there was a roof, it's also still an unsolved question. But in two cases we have clearly entrances in B and C.
Excuse me, may I ask one more question?
Please.
It's about that which you have described as a totem. That's very specific, extraordinary sculpture. Where was it found exactly?
It was found in a trench nearby the main excavation area. We didn't intend to excavate there, but the sculpture was visible at the surface. And so we decided to make a small trench to get it. It was set in a building of the younger layer of the PP&B layer, the yellow layer, but the object itself could be much, much older, so belonging to the monumental phase.
I don't have any questions, but I have a few ideas. The main entrance to the temple is near the bus stop, and before you enter to the temple, there is a lot of holes. And those holes are star map. And the second thing is when you look at the belts in the main temple, Temple D, on the two pillars, the belts are different. One of them is for the priest, and the second one is for the priestess. And the signs on the pillars correspond with it, and correspond with the position of the moon and of the sun on our sky. So, if you want really know what is Göbekli Tepe, I think you should search the answers in mythology and Vedas. But
okay, thank you for
one thing. But the temple is the mirror of our sky.
Sorry?
The temple is a mirror of our sky.
Mr. Schmidt, do you have an assumption why the people left Göbekli Tepe alone there and not destroyed it, but just mildly buried?
The people who are visible in Göbekli Tepe, in its structures, had been hunter-gatherers. But these hunter-gatherers had been inventing the new way of life of farming in this time. And it seems like very probable that after this invention really had been successful, after the people changed themselves from hunter to farmer, also their spiritual world changed, and they didn't need any more Göbekli Tepe. So it was just abandoned, left, and never being reused.
Is the possibility there that the two pillars in the center symbolize the genders, man and woman? And there are, as far as I have seen there are 10 columns, 10 pillars, and in the middle 2, mostly.
In enclosure D we have the two central pillars with belts and loin clothes, but wearing belts, that's important. So the loin clothes don't show us the sex of these beings, but wearing belt, we know from figurines, this should be male, both should be male. It would be very easy to indicate if one male and a female would be there. So it doesn't look like that is a couple, it's just two males in the center, and also it's high probable that all the other ones are also meant male. So we don't have female symbolism in Göbekli Tepe. It's not at all. No, yeah. It doesn't mean that in the spiritual world of these people, females had been not existing and not important. But the rituals or the function which had been done in Göbekli Tepe, the function of Göbekli Tepe, was a function where female symbols had been not important.